Mick, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Dion, great to be here.
You have been on before. You were our very first guest.
Wow,
For
repeat
people who
customer.
haven't, yeah, that's it. Repeat business. That's what we're all about here. In terms of your background, do you want to just give the listeners a little bit of a recap of sort of your career and some of the things you've been involved in, and now the latest venture and sort of more specific where you're up to these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So proud nerd and geek. Built computers and built databases. Started working in web development, built a web application, and started my first startup really early. Learned a lot of lessons in the dot-com crash. End up working for a company that had 50 million users globally and was a really interesting business. And then end up actually wanting to work with multiple companies. I really like the fast pace of startups. So I started an incubator called Pollinizer back in 2008 with Phil Maul. We built and invested in 25 companies, some successes, lots of lessons learned. Ended up running Telstra's entrepreneur program called Marudi. I was a co-founder of that with Annie and Charlotte. And then that took me to the US. And that's where I started really seeing this massive climate problem. And I started my journey working with climate tech company. It was really clean tech and sustainability tech way back then. But it was, and I think that's back when we first started maybe recording this last podcast. But I came back to Australia about 3 years ago, just pre-COVID, and really, really wanted to be climate focused, but it was still quite slow moving. And then in 2021, I started Climate Salad. Originally, it was supposed to be just a blog, but
Right.
what happens is sometimes, like I've been wrong with timing many times in my life, but I was lucky in timing with Climate Salad. I wrote a blog post and I got 5 companies reach out, and then I wrote another blog post and I got another 5 companies. And within 3 months, we went from 12 to 40 climate tech companies. And I was told that there wasn't enough of an industry here. But the reality was that there was a lot of things that were climate positive that the world just didn't really fully appreciate with climate, like the products and that they needed. But there's just so many big seismic shifts happening in this space that once the world clicked that a 2050 problem is a today problem, and once the investors realized that actually there's 50 years of growth here, then things started to pick up. So we went from 40 to 90 companies at the start of 2022 last year, and we just hit 400 companies. And I don't doubt we've even got half of the Australian companies. Look, that's 400 Australian companies that have a direct mission to solve global climate problems. And what we do for them is 2 levels of support we provide. One is kind of a platform that offers light touch support, peer-to-peer support, self-help with tools and content, a bit of light mentoring and collaboration.
Yep.
And then we layer on top of that deep diving, like really material significant support for those companies that are at a massive inflection point. So either you've launched your product and you need help getting your first customer, or you're going to raise a big amount of capital, or you're going to go enter a new market, or in that hire a first outside hire or something. So we offer these programs where we do deep mentoring and international trade missions. And when I say we've been offering these, we've really only last year. It's only been 1 year. We've been operating at pace, but we're basically tripling down on all of those this year, which has been great. And the other big thing we do for these companies is get them in front of their stakeholders. So we get them in front of customers, talent, and investors. So we run these big events where we basically get the world to see that there is a climate tech industry. What is it? Touch it and feel it, because it's not just software. And we had a climate tech festival in Sydney at the Maritime Museum in December, and we had 500 people come.
Yeah. Okay.
Universities, super funds, angel investors, corporates. Yeah, just an incredible array of people. So very, very exciting. And love what I do and looking forward to more growth this year.
And as you've gone along, what is the biggest difference you're seeing now as an operator of this business compared to sort of 10 and 20 years ago? Because in between that, you've been an investor and done different things. But when you get sort of back into the driver's seat on something like this, what's the biggest differences that you're seeing now? Probably older and wiser as well, and you've seen different things, right? So it's a different perspective.
Yeah, a completely different perspective. So back in Pollinizer days, we were still fighting with legislation around share option laws. So you couldn't even incentivize your team that to get taxed. So, and then, there wasn't even an accelerator. I actually named Startmate, and I was one of the first investors. And that went on to be so successful. They created Blackbird as a big VC on top of that, Nikki and Rick and the team and Sam Wong and others. And then we've had this whole swathe of successful companies, which attracts more investment and has built this industry. So the climate tech industry gets to build on top of the shoulders of all that hard work. There's 100 people who've done hard work, and there's a whole generation of people. I wasn't the first. I didn't create technology, so. But that's a big one, is that you're building. One is you're building on top of an existing, growing and strong tech industry with significantly more capital than we've ever seen before on all fronts. And the second one is that climate has a massive sense of urgency. So it has a sense of urgency, but also has a sense of collaboration, right? It's not a selfishness. We're solving climate problems for the whole world, not like it has to be a good business, but there's this positivity around it, which wasn't always there in tech. Australia can have a scarcity mentality, but there's definitely an abundance mentality, which is really good. Absolutely older and wiser. I had a funny moment that other business owners might appreciate. I hired a woman named Jackie Bond to help me out on the strategy and finance, and she's now joined as CFO. But I actually went to kindergarten with Jackie and primary school and high school, and then she was the smartest woman in our team anyway. So she ended up going to Goldman Sachs for a long time, and then left there and wanted to go work in climate. So she joined us to help out. And one day and one of the reasons I wanted to hire her, because she thinks, acts, processes, and works completely different to me. She's high attention to detail, high structure, high process, risk averse. So we balance each other beautifully, and that's something. Yeah, Phil and I are great friends, but we are two alike. We're both from Pollenizer, both excitable. Chase that shiny object. We can sell like crazy. But had this wonderful moment where Jackie had just basically solved this big problem for me, and I didn't even have to do it, and we got a customer happy and over the line. And it literally brought me to tears, because I was like, oh my god, that sort of now that I know I'm older, I know that that the mix is more important, and this goes to how diversity is one of the top 3 pillars of climate science, because it makes everything better. Better.
And it takes time to learn those things about yourself as well, right? In terms of your strengths and weaknesses, and not just what they are, but also what you're missing. So then when, like you say, when you find somebody who can do that and really complements your skill set, that's pretty special when you find that right person to be a part of that journey.
It really is. And I highly encourage everybody to use a tool called Fingerprint for Success. It's, funnily enough, after Pollenizer, I did this Fingerprint for Success, and it basically told me that Phil and I were, we weren't great co-founders because we were too alike. But like having tools like that helps, but also just the self-awareness. Like I think I rode the wave of, and despite not knowing all that stuff, you did okay at times. But with climate, I just don't want to muck around, right? There's no time to have an ego with it. You've just got to get it all done and solve it. So but it does. It really takes a time and self-awareness, but also, I've got good people push me and say, do let Mick be Mick. Sorry, I referred myself in the third person, but play to your strengths, mate. So
100%, 100%. No, that is critical, right? Because otherwise, you be like Glenn McGrath, one of our greatest bowlers. It'd be like him working on his batting all the time and trying to, he was a useless batter, but who cares? Let him bowl and don't worry about the rest of it. Like you just got to play to your strengths sometimes. And
takes a team. Yeah.
That's the key thing. Are you noticing in terms of, especially with younger people coming through, not necessarily just younger, but are you noticing it's in terms of recruiting and finding people and that energy, bringing people on board, and even the community more broadly, that because of the type of topic, tech and the broader issues, are you finding that easier than maybe other companies might to bring people on board? Because of, I'm not saying that's a sexier industry or anything like that, but it's something that's it's an emotive industry, and it's a very powerful driver, I would have thought, for a lot of people. Does that help in some way?
Massively. Yeah, massively. I think I don't know if you've read a bit about climate quitting. There's of the pressures on big corporations to act positively for climate beyond greenwashing,
Yes.
their employees is one of the biggest reasons to do it. People just they have it's a very privileged thing to say, but certainly younger generations don't even see it as a privilege; they see it as an imperative that the work they do matters. Again, and maybe they're okay to not to go and get mega wealthy because they just don't see value in that. They'd rather have purpose. So it is really positive, and I think the biggest thing from us is it needs all skills. Like, you don't have to be a chemist, physicist, biologist, or a work with dolphins to trees to be climate positive. We need marketing people, accountants, lawyers, all types. So we need tens of thousands of electricians and plumbers to disconnect gas and others, and we need people to get into hydrogen. So it's a big thing for us, absolutely. That we know that the younger generation are going to live more in that time of tough environment, and they're prioritizing it. And it's definitely, I feel myself as a middle-aged person between two generations, a generation which has kind of worked very hard to create wealth and create this platform by which I get to benefit and the younger generation gets to benefit. And you don't want to be disrespectful of that. But in order to the cost of achieving that is actually being borne by the environment, not completely, but it's been borne by the environment, and we've got to pay down that debt. So, and I think the young generation really feel that. So it's interesting generational challenges.
I mean, it really is, because I notice it even in terms of managing money for families. When we have those discussions around investment for energy for the last couple of years has been a really big investment for us across all types of energy too, right? So you get these debates within families even where, if we're looking at energy, oil and gas is on the agenda with the older generation, but then in some cases, the younger generation will veto that investment. And that's my next question, I guess, is what is climate tech? Because what does it encompass? As we've had discussions in the past, it's far broader than what I understood earlier.
It is, and it's tough to get your head around in a lot of ways. And I think people can define it in their own ways, whatever is really, really relevant. And I think part of the complexity goes to that point around oil and gas. Like we can't switch 100% to we can't transition in a day, and we need the skills and capabilities of oil, gas, mining, or heavy industry, all these big companies. So we just can't get there without them. So that produces complexity. But the simplest way I describe it is scalable innovations that solve global climate problems. And the bits in there that are important is that they're scalable. So it's obviously services are very important, but they just don't scale. And we push globally because Australia is typically a small market, even though, snowy hydro is fantastic. And the technology that goes into that can be scalable, but it itself is obviously not as scalable. And then the other thing is solving global climate problems. And now that's a really, really big open phrase as well. Yeah. And the way we think about it is 4 impacts and 5 sectors. So the 4 impacts we think about is reducing the emissions that are going out. Right. So I'm going to drive an EV that is powered by my solar panels. That's going to have less going out. And there's a lot of questions there around embodied carbon and solar, etc. But let's take that for granted. Then there's removing emissions that are already out there. So carbon capture and use, or carbon capture and storage, sequestration, planting more trees, kelp, etc. Unfortunately, those 2 things alone are not enough. We already have to adapt. Sea level rise, bushfires, floods. So adaptation is absolutely a critical component of investment. We have to invest in adaptation. And the 4th one is natural capital, which includes basically biodiversity and just the environment that we've abused for the last 100 years. So, and that one is the hardest to grasp, because even though we've had 6,000 years to understand managing money, and people might have a financial planner or a personal wealth manager to help them on that we don't have the same infrastructure around biodiversity and nature, but it's coming. So yeah, so they're the four impact areas, and then sectors. I like Bill Gates's model, which is growing, making, moving, powering, and cooling.
Right.
So that's a good way to think it. Instead of industries, because it touches nearly everything. Like
Yeah.
they're the five kind of things we need to do sustainably, and so there are different ways to think about that.
What surprised you the most as you've gone through this journey with this? When did you start Climate Sail? How long ago now?
It was July 2021, so it's just over 18 months old. Yeah.
What surprised you the most?
Well, by far is the growth. Like I expected 5 years, just because I've been through, been around for a long time, and it's just been slow, and also there was still a lot of negativity globally. Yeah, there was just massive negativity at policy levels, corporates, people, like media. It just, but I really reflected on it. What changed was that I think the biggest one that changed was a lot of people saw that a 2050, enough people, not all, but enough people saw that this is not a 2050 problem. This is a today problem. And there's a lot of issues. Like, I'm studying a master's of sustainable development, and the big thing I keep pushing is that our narrative is terrible. Like, it's like, oh, be careful, the world's going to increase in temperature 1.5 degrees. It was like, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean to me? Oh, in 2050, it's going to be really bad. You're like, that's like 25 years away. Like, how do you? We've got such a immediate gratification society. Like, it's just hard to do. But what happened, I think, in the last couple of years, you had bushfires, you had pandemics, which are absolutely increased likelihood because of our encroachment on the environment. And then you have extreme weather events. Like, New South Wales had 5 1-in-100-year floods. Like, and that's the consequence. That's what I talk to people about is, you could have what a month. You could have a bushfire, a flood, a heat wave, a massive storm. Like, just all these things can happen much more regularly. That's the issue. So, and it has to affect people personally. They have to really, really affect it. But I think that the big combination globally that what happened is on corporates, because they got pressure from employees, they got pressure from customers, they got pressure from policy and regulators, and they got pressure from investors, because you might make a ton of money this year on oil and gas. Next year, 5 years from now, like long term, are you going to go long on oil and gas? That would be tough, right? Like, so I think all those pressures combine to move capital, and capital moves the markets. So
that's a tricky one though, right? Because you're right. Long term, it's got to be clean energy, that sort of stuff. Is that because I see that there's that systemic underinvestment in energy in total, right? Whatever type, doesn't matter. We've got an issue with an underinvestment in everything to do with energy, which has caused some of these problems that have arisen and been amplified by everything in Europe. But what's the answer to that from your perspective? Because, like you said before, you do need all types for now. Maybe not. You want to get rid of some of these things down the track, but for now you do need, and that sort of, like I say, amplify the problem a little bit, because everyone is a little bit scared in terms of the big corporates, and that they're scared to invest in some of these other older technologies that are frowned upon. But you kind of need them in the short term because we're not getting to the other stuff quick enough. So how do you balance that? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I totally agree, and I think there's really hardliners who are right that we needed to move 20 years ago, when we're a bit late, so we need to go faster. And there's definitely not enough sense of urgency everywhere. People are like, oh, well, we don't want to lose jobs. And it's like, well, you might have to lose some jobs if you don't want to have massive environmental problems and food security issues, like like in 10 years' time. But it's, again, election cycles and all those things, quarterly returns just don't work well with humans, and certainly developed nations at this point. So it is really, really complex. Like, again, thinking back to that matrix I talked about with impacts and the different sectors and jobs to be done. And you're totally right. Like, there's not a single one of those which is on the other side of, what we would call product market fit, or that you could scale and say it's already done.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people who say to me, hey, why do we need more tech? We've got solar, wind, EVs, and we've got, if we do, then we're done. I'm like, well, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I think I had an EV last week, and I couldn't find a charging station between Sydney and Hunter Valley. So there's a lot of infrastructure around that needs to change. Food, like it's really interesting when you think about Ukraine, and Vladimir Putin got voted top green influence last year, not because he wanted to be, but because he basically made everyone, challenged everybody's paradigms around energy and food security. Ukraine produces a ton of food and fertilizer, and obviously Russia with the oil and gas. So that's forced everyone to really, and like a bit like COVID did, right? It basically said, don't assume everything's going to be the same. Don't be complacent. And I think I was just speaking this morning to somebody about like what's big corporates' role in this, and I said every company I speak to who has a big ambition is right now facing or is about to face massive complexity globally with supply chains, with policy and regulation, with partnering, and who's going to help them do that? Like you need to. I make the joke that this is not a Blockbuster situation where Netflix just disrupts Blockbuster and all Blockbuster closes down. I think we need oil, gas mining companies, heavy industry to transition, because we need base load of batteries. We need to be able to provide distributed grids. We need to be able to move food and get supply chain. We need advanced manufacturing everywhere. Like it's.
Well, it's because it's not scalable tech necessarily. It's really infrastructure in terms of the energy side of it, isn't it? So that stuff takes decades. And like you say, the easiest answer would have been, if you started properly 20 years ago in terms of everyone around the world, because then you don't have these problems when you're dependent on Russian oil and gas. You could look at it from the perspective of if we'd done this earlier because there was a different urgency or we cared more about stuff, whatever it might be, and everyone was on renewable, well, Russia can't do what they did because they just don't have the oil and gas dominance that they've been able to use or weaponize. So, there's some of those things that would have fixed some of these issues ahead of time. And what things like COVID or climate, whatever it might be, have highlighted, I think, is the fragilities of the system, of economies, of supply chains, and they're really fragile. I mean, they can be robust too, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't take much for some of those things to start breaking down. And then it takes quite a bit of time for them to be resolved, right? I mean, you've got to look at the airline industry. That's such a complex industry that it's sort of built to be like a V12 and operate at a really high level when it's all firing on all cylinders. But then when you've got to dial it down to quarter pace, that engine and that system is not made for that. So you get all sorts of problems arise.
Totally,
right? When you're trouble, because it is built to be like really robust, and if it's not, then it becomes very fragile.
I think that's exactly right, and I think it's about what are you optimizing for. I mean, I have this challenge with a lot of Americans about market forces, right? And it's like, hey, it's great for optimizing for profit and growth, but if you're also optimized for quality of life or health or education or the environment, right? It's like the environment just doesn't get factored into those things. So and I see actually the next 10 years, while I'm working really hard, I think there's a tremendous business opportunity in climate tech. It's why I'm investing so heavily. My sense is that it's going to be really messy because there's going to be some industries disrupted. There's going to be some people unhappy about that and they won't go quietly. There's going to be we're going through these massive issues with offsets, and they're messy and they're problematic and they don't have integrity. But we've got to go through that mess to get to a good spot. There's exactly the same thing around EVs. Like, it's like, oh, well, it's going to disrupt a lot of people and local changes. Okay, but, we got to get to the other side. Greenwashing, I think it's like, it's not great, but it's a first step. Once you do greenwashing, and then you set a goal, and then you set some actions, and then you move forward. Like, it's going to be, there's a whole industry of a platform around this. Like, I think about SaaS software. If I started a SaaS software today, I'd actually just subscribe to 10 other SaaS platforms, and that would be half my product.
Yeah.
But they didn't exist 10, 12 years ago. Like, we need that whole platform for climate, and that's another opportunity.
What areas within climate, if we drill down a little bit, what are the ones that you're most excited about?
I get asked this a lot, and it's not even about picking my favorites, my children, but it's partly because there is such a range. I think about it in a couple of different lenses. One is what's happening overall, or what's the sentiment, and that's, I think, by far the most exciting thing generally, is that there's just a strong foundation which is enough to grow a whole industry. The job's not done yet, but I feel like that's and the fact that, again, that data out this morning from Cut Through Ventures about climate tech being the most interesting space, like that's a really good signal to me. The second one is the amount of effort going into the hardest area, I think, in terms of natural capital and biodiversity. It's really late. Like, it's kind of easy to say, I want to do another Tesla, or the Tesla for home batteries, or solar, or even food like V2 burgers and Fable. Like, food, they're sort of really much more short term, but the not short term, but more immediate, I think, in terms of market opportunities. Some amazing news out this week about preserving the Great Barrier Reef and coral. Like, it's just some amazing technology that's enabled us to do a better job of doing that. Preserving what's happening in seaweed. Like, seaweed is probably the most exciting area. Like, it's just, people don't think about it, but seaweed holds so much carbon. It is so versatile and valuable. You can make plastics out of it. You can just do tons of things with it. And, like, I'm just constantly blown away at what seaweed could do. And we've taken it for granted. Like, we just haven't had to call upon it. And now we found these opportunities. And I think the other principle is, and goes back to your other point about challenging the status quo. Sometimes you find just great answers that have zero negatives. They just have, like, positive after positive. So, GoTerra, who uses black fly maggots to eat food waste and turn it into proteins for farms feed, is just incredible, right? And they get paid on both sides. Thermal out of Newcastle Uni sucks carbon out of the air and makes sustainable energy bricks. Like, there's no negative and no loss. And it's kind of the joke we talk about when people are denying. You're like, I mean, all you get with a climate positive future is clean air, good access to food, clean water, security, less noise. Like, EVs are quieter. Like, it's positive, even if you take out the climate, global warming issues.
Yeah.
So
doing business in a sustainable way should be our starting point, right? For a start, forget about your views on climate change. We should be doing business in a sustainable way, because by definition, if we're not doing it that way, we're doing it in an unsustainable way that will not let us continue. So that's right. That's your starting point, right? It should be.
It should be. The issue is that I know, as someone who's done it multiple times and not succeeded every time, it's hard to run a business. And we're asking these climate tech people to do three hard things, which is run a business, build the technology, and solve climate problems. But I agree. I think the question is, what do you mean by sustainability? And if you say we should all have access to clean water, good food, and peace and quiet, but you've got to do that and make a margin. You got to, and that's why I think it's important. Like, there's a lot of people who I think might be like, well, we just got to, give energy away, give food away. I don't think we can solve climate and capitalism's issues at the same time. I think we've got to use capital and markets, because they're not perfect, but the best we've got. Well, they say about democracy. That's what I'm saying.
It's better than what is it? It's better than, it's the worst one other than all. Worst form of government other than all the other ones, or something along that line. It's Churchill or someone that said
Churchill.
That. But it's true.
So look, I'm excited by a lot of them, and what one of the reasons why when we do a climate sales event, we instead of doing like 3 10-minute pitches, we do 50, 30-second pitches, is because we really want people to see that there's no single magic one that's going to solve it. There's a lot of parts to it, and there's a lot of different things you can get. Everyone can find something to get excited about and participate in. So that's why we want people to see that the breadth.
What's the biggest challenge been so far? Mick?
I mean, there's only been a few. Australia obviously had, with government change last year, has gone from positive blocking to positive policy supporting, and good timing around that, I think, because you look at the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, and the European Carbon Adjustment Border Mechanism. The policy is going to drive a ton of growth in the next 10 years across all these areas, and but that was really hard to begin with. There was a lot of people just dancing around it. They were worried it was a poison pill, right, or poison chalice. So that was really challenging. One of the other big ones is that initially we were referred to foundations or philanthropy, like, oh, you want to do something for the environment, you're after a donation. I'm like, no, I'm building a business that takes plastic out of the ocean, like as a product, because governments have to pay for that. You're like, oh, like so that was a bit of a shift. Definitely thinking about like the timing of this, like, are you way too early? Because some people knew we should have started 20 years ago, and other people are like, is it really that bad? So that has been a challenge. And the other big one is that 80% of the companies are hardware based, and that's just harder to scale globally. So and the other pressure is, again, you can't. The model used to be you make it work, and then you go to Shenzhen and make 1 million units, and then you drop ship it around the world, and then all your carbon benefits are gone. So we have to also reinvent advanced manufacturing, like regionally advanced manufacturing, rather than a large, super large, mega large scale like Foxconn. So there are, which is an opportunity again, and that's a good thing. Governments are getting behind that as well, because they recognise there's local jobs in this.
And in terms of the business, you started, like you say, you started as a blog. It's now you've got how many employees you got now at the moment?
We just put out a JD for a sixth role, so 6 people will be 6 soon. So
So this is growing quickly, right? So what's next for Climate Salad? Over the next, the next 12 months, but also the next 5 and 10 years, where do you see all of this going?
Yeah, so the platform which we created last year with 400 companies, hundreds and hundreds of people around it supporting it, and we did an international trade mission to the US, and that really worked. And we ran this mentoring program, which really worked. And what we're rolling out this year is what we're calling the Global Growth Program. And we're looking for somewhere between 20 to 40 companies this year who are on the cusp of international growth. And our intention is to raise investment to be able to invest in those companies and support their growth, and then help them basically be global. So because Australia is a big country but a small market, one of the biggest growth points in tech is when an Australian company gets their first international customer. And I think that's a huge unlock in climate tech. So that's what we're rolling out this year, is that program to be able to identify those companies in our network and support them to go get some international customers.
Yeah, mate, that sounds really exciting. And what are you most excited about next? The next phase.
Yeah, this is the big one for us. Like last year was an MVP. What I'm thrilled about is that I now no longer have to spend a lot of time explaining to people that climate tech is a big opportunity. I think everyone's getting a strong sense of it, and now we can put that to good work. Like we can take that capital, put it into really great companies, and see them flourish. And this is the year we're going to see that. Like I think all those things that have been sort of building a base level of momentum in the last few years are coming to a really key growth point. And I think everyone's been waiting for Australia to play this leadership role globally, and I think this is the year. The first year we just got started. Last year we built a really big foundation, and this year I think it's especially the international. So we went to the US last year. This year we want to go to Asia, Europe, and the US. because Europe is still way ahead, more ahead in terms of market and capital.
Yeah.
USA is catching up. Africa is a huge opportunity, South America, but Southeast Asia as well. Like it's the most amount of public capital is actually out of China. So there's opportunities abounding, and we just we're a facilitator. Like I'm not directly building any of these companies. What we do at Climate Salad is basically just solve the immediate problem for these entrepreneurs, and that the big one we're adding to this year is that global growth, and that's just thrilling. Like unfortunately, I don't think I can, because I want to stay happily married. I won't be going to every market constantly, but I probably could. But that's why we're building a team out and got a great group of mentors. So just excited by that global growth. With just some of these stories you're going to hear, and just people can get their hands around it, like literally because of their products. Yeah, thrilled.
Mate, it's been really exciting to see it start from the very beginning and get to where you've got to now. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how it progresses over the years ahead.
Oh, thanks, Dion. I continue to
Good
learn
stuff.
from you and your teammates. So really excited, and yeah, can't wait.
All right. Good to chat, Mick. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.